سيداتي سادتي، بإمكانكم الجلوس في مقاعدكم. برنامجنا سيستأنف الآن.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will now resume.
سيداتي سادتي، من فضلكم رحبوا معنا بالرئيس التنفيذي لسواري فينتشرز أحمد الألفي وضيوفه الكرام.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Chairman Sawari Ventures Ahmed Al-Alfi and his panel.
Hello? Okay, it's after lunch. Everybody outside, you can hear me. Come back in. Finish your food, finish your coffee, come back. Gentlemen in the back, I can see all of you. There's 100 of you there. Ladies, we'd like you re-engaged in the event. Please join us. Thank you very much. So, it's a pleasure to welcome you here. And hopefully we will give you some information that will be very useful and maybe a bit entertaining. We're going to involve the audience. There will be lots of question and answer, and the microphones will only go to the 10th row. So the people sitting in the back, you're not going to be able to ask questions. If you want to ask questions, come up to the front. Okay? So I'd like to introduce my co-panelists. Joe Lonsdale is the founder of 8VC. He actually started as a techie, founded a couple of companies, an amazing company called Palantir that's a multi-billion-dollar software company that works in the defense and the finance industry. Created a wealth management technology company, worked at PayPal, various hedge funds, and most importantly for all of us here in the region, he's the vice chairman of Hyperloop that's going to make the train that'll take you from here to Dubai maybe in 45 minutes, or take us from Abu Dhabi to Dubai in 10, 12 minutes. Welcome, Joe. Jonathan Ortmans, our other panelist, is the founder and the president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. And it's a platform, a global platform to help startups. And he's actually one of the experts kind of in what we're going to be talking about, which is entrepreneurship ecosystems. He was appointed by President Obama to the Spark Global Initiative. He's originally an economist, works in the Kaufman Foundation, but Jonathan is one of the experts on ecosystems and what makes an entrepreneurial ecosystem around the world. And why don't we start off with having Jonathan give us a brief presentation, and then we'll go from there.
Great.
And I'm going to involve the audience in the discussion very early on. You're going to hear just a couple of comments from everybody, and then we want all of you engaged. We want to know what your thoughts are and what you want to hear about.
Thank you, Ahmed. Well, it's great to be here. I know that all of us really relish our opportunity to visit the kingdom. And thank you so much for having us as your guest, and particularly thanks to the MISC Foundation for this extraordinary event. I think it's vital that all young people have the opportunity to consider how they can work with others around the world, particularly in our field, which is how do you birth the new, figure out better ways of doing things. So the topic that we were asked to address today was, had this term new normal in it. And so what I thought I would talk about today a little bit to get some reaction from our panel is why our entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world are actually very ready for what we are thinking about in terms of the new normal. So let's think about some very recent things that might help the world understand what's really going on. We've all heard recently about our new president in the United States, Mr. Trump, an unexpected surprise to the American public. Secondly, you've heard about Brexit, the UK leaving the European Union. And of course, you've heard about many things such as Uber and Airbnb disrupting very large traditional industries. But what are the things that we're going to be walking into as a world as we look at these kinds of changes? They're indicators that the speed of change is happening much, much faster than it ever did before, and that because of digital disruption and information technology, there's going to be such extraordinary transparency around the availability of information that we're seeing a lot of power go to local grassroots communities. So what this really means is there's a great deal of uncertainty. Well, the good news is that this uncertainty is something that entrepreneurs thrive on. And if we look at some of the trends happening in terms of the highly regulated industries that we're going to be disrupting over the course of the next 10 years, entrepreneurs are very well positioned to be able to take advantage of this. The challenge is that our societies and policymakers are not quite as ready as our entrepreneurs. So let's look at what are some of the trends in the ecosystem. So how is it that entrepreneurs can leverage uncertainty? Well, I've had the great privilege of now working in 165 countries, and I've personally had the privilege of working and visiting in 100 of those countries to observe and witness what kind of trends are happening. And the interesting observation I will tell you is the remarkable similarity of the entrepreneurial culture, no matter what the size of economy, the type of culture, or the part of the earth it's in. I often tell people I could bring you all together, put you in one room, give you a different passport to go to a different country when you leave, and you would fit in very well. And the reason I say this is because here's some of the common characteristics that people like myself, and I know many of my panelists will witness in these entrepreneurial ecosystems. So first of all, I think it's important to observe that we've now seen a lot more of a scientific approach to our field. It used to be that we were just figuring things out all the time. Now we know that founders, when they're out creating companies, understand that they're conducting an experiment. They're not starting a business. They're validating ideas, they're testing them. As has famously been said, they're building airplanes in the air, and they're essentially coming up with a lot more proven methodologies about how do you test and validate the idea before they take it to scale. The second thing we're noticing is that we're seeing better teams getting formed. So it's not just teams of traditional business players from an industry, it's wonderful matchmaking between disruptive innovators and those with unique knowledge of the industry to create a real innovation. We're also seeing the absolute rise of the network. The network, the notion that people can have free a larger number of networks than ever before to be able to leverage for the purpose of not just finding things like capital, but also the smart knowledge and the mentorship that goes with it. Not to mention the market access that brings. And finally, and I think this is really important in so many countries outside the United States, we're seeing this common comment about the stigma of failure disappearing. You know, my brother, even in the UK, when he failed with one of his companies, he said to me, they've stopped inviting me to dinner. It's almost like I have leprosy. But this is now going as people understand this notion that you're really just collecting information and that you're learning how to take that model further. And lastly, I think I want to really emphasize this important point that we're seeing in the entrepreneurship education arena, something that we invest in a lot at the Kauffman Foundation. We've moved away from traditional curriculum in universities, and it's become a lot more dependent upon peer-to-peer learning where entrepreneurs will pull on-demand information that they need when they need it from the networks that they trust. And that we've moved away from an environment where we're dependent upon classrooms, curriculum, and bricks and mortar institutions. But there's two more important observations I will quickly brief on. This is perhaps the most important one to the pessimists of the future of our global economy. And that is that ultimately what we're really doing with entrepreneurial ecosystems is that we're committing to the fact that we're creating new value for our society. This is the great contribution that the entrepreneurs make. We know we always talk about they create jobs, we talk about the fact they unleash innovation, they of course self-educate themselves, but it's the fact that ultimately they're creating new economic value for our societies. And so when we're conducting work and figuring out how to make these ecosystems work, we need to be careful to understand that we can't follow any one regimen or model. There's no way you can replicate Silicon Valley. Each ecosystem will have its own characteristic and it'll grow organically. And while we're in it for the long haul in doing it, we're seeing the speed of change occur and the rapid sharing of knowledge around the world that we're seeing very effective local ecosystems in our cities and communities flourish quite quickly. But my last point around what the trends we're seeing is really around this, is the most powerful force is really this new generation of entrepreneurs. You know, when I first started my first company in the 1980s, it was frankly pretty competitive, and we were pretty mean, and quite frankly, it was about the money. This is no longer the case. These guys are direct, they're global, but most importantly, they're much more generous, I think, than their predecessors. There's a sense that you will celebrate when others in your village or in your startup community or in your shared workspace succeed. There is very much this sense that while they're interested in doing well, doing good has to come at the same time. And lastly, I would just say in this regard, you know, I always love this quote from our, you know, always famous Steve Jobs, is that really the most insightful thing for him wasn't the money. And of course, what's mostly the reason that drives, I think, most entrepreneurs we meet around the world is that they've got a curiosity about how they can, about the possibility of what you could do in solving a problem. All right, so very quickly, 2 quick priorities ahead and how we capitalize this in our entrepreneurial ecosystems in the environment of the new normal. First of all, the biggest problem is really around data and knowledge, and so we're now very focused on figuring out how do we get better data. Right now we've had an explosion of programs, but flatlining rates of new firm formation. And the second thing I would say, and by the way, on data, we're releasing this information today. We have a new report out on the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Saudi Arabia. I can take questions on this, but you'll be interested to know that Saudi Arabia ranks 30th in the world of 137 entrepreneurial ecosystems. But the last thing I would say is that we want to make sure that we make it easier for you, the entrepreneurs, to thrive. And for many reasons, I have to tell you, there are no excuses that you can't succeed. It is easier today than it was 10 years ago. And if you want, we can talk about that in our panel as to why, but I'll leave these up here as to some of the reasons. So without further ado, I'll go back to our discussion, but I do want to make sure that we have a chance to tell you that this week is Global Entrepreneurship Week. And for the youth entrepreneurs in the room, this is a celebration where in all 160 countries that participate, there are 41,000 events happening this week. You're part of it now. And there are more than 10 million people attending those events. So if you didn't think that entrepreneurship is important and perceived as being important in every country and every culture, I think that's a useful indicator. It's a remarkable celebration of the entrepreneurial spirit. It's a celebration of what my co-panelists work hard every day to try to enable. And I'm so delighted that we had a chance to have this conversation at the heart of Global Entrepreneurship Week. Thank you.
So taking that forward and looking at different ecosystems, maybe Joe, I'd ask you a question. If you're going to a different country and looking at ecosystems, what are the 3 things that you'd say in an ecosystem from a macro level, this is a very interesting place to invest? And what are the 2 or 3 things that would say, I'll pass, there's another country to go look at?
Well, thank you, Ahmed and Jonathan. It's an honor to be here. It's my first day in Riyadh, actually. I see I'm getting the desert sun experience on the stage right here. I think I can sort of see you all. You know, I think the first thing in terms of coming and working and building new companies somewhere is going to be talent, is what I'd say. I think that's our biggest focus. And a lot of my companies I've been lucky to be involved with in Silicon Valley is how do you make a place, something where the top people want to come work with you. And obviously you can't do that if there's a city where there's not a lot of relevant talent. So I think education, I think inspiring the youth to learn the skills necessary is number 1, I'd say, for going there. And then number 2, I would say, is the kind of regulatory apparatus, which is like a big word, but really how hard is it to start things and build things? And so my sister-in-law is from Vietnam, and my brother and her were there, and we were meeting some entrepreneurs, and it turns out you have to like hire multiple people and go stand in line to get forms, and it's just like every week they have new forms, and it's really expensive, takes a long time. And we were talking to the government later about how proud they were that they're working on entrepreneurship. And I said, have any of you ever tried to start a company here? Everyone's just like so frustrated with it, and that's an extreme example. But I really think that a lot of places, you know, when I take my companies there, if we're going to have to spend millions of dollars of legal fees to work there, that's not going to be the first place you're going to go. And so I think getting that connection, having metrics, having the government actually measure and fix these things is very important. And some of my friends here have told me that's something that they'd like to work on to make easier here as well. So it sounds like that might be getting better. And then third, I think finally is more about the society's attitude towards disrupting industries, changing industries. One of the big themes in Silicon Valley right now is how all these big industries are going to work very differently in 10 or 20 years throughout the world. So the way that processes work in finance and the way that government itself works is going to change thanks to technology. So if you're going to try to build something where you're changing it and making it work better, is the society going to respond well to that? Or is it going to be that there's a guy who owns the big thing in this industry and he's going to call his cousin running the government and they're going to crush you? So if that's the case, then maybe that's not the best place to work. So I think having a society that's open to new ideas, is open to new ways things are going to work is going to be very important to me as well.
Okay. You know, I think we'll maybe start the audience participation part. We've kind of taken a big overview. We are talking to you kind of about the ecosystem, about different countries, and how to, hopefully, people here are concerned about the whole MENA region, and we're looking at how to build ecosystems. So why don't we start with questions, and I want to take the first question from this side. Any ladies, questions? We have a microphone over here somewhere. There should be somebody with a microphone. Tina, microphone. Okay. We'll delay the microphone part a bit. The microphone's busy. There we go. There's a hand right there. Hello. There you go. Any questions over here? We'll take a question from here afterwards. Okay, right there. We'll start here and then come here.
Hi. So we've seen a lot of amazing success stories from the MENA region, and there's definitely a plethora of creativity and potential. As females in this region, how can they access and leverage the ecosystem?
Okay. Well, do either one of you want to comment on it kind of in a generic global sense, and maybe I'll make a comment about the MENA region.
So I have to admit, I'm just learning about the MENA region. I've only been here a couple times. In Silicon Valley, this is a big effort that a lot of us are making, is to bring more females into entrepreneurship there as well. Although we do have many of them, the ratio is still very skewed. You know, one of the more important things that I think is to get more women as investors as well. Because I think when you're building these things, a big part of the challenge is how do you get the financial resources. And if you don't have as many women investing, you're usually don't get as many women entrepreneurs, because I think the connection, I think men can invest in women as well, but I think having women role models as investors and women who've been entrepreneurs who are successful to help the next generation, to mentor them as well, is a very important thing, because I think that tends to lead to that success. So I think those are things to think about.
Okay, Alan, Tina, we need mics over here, so get the mics ready here on this side. I will just make a comment about your question about the MENA region. We have an accelerator in Cairo, Jeddah, and Abu Dhabi, and the most amazing thing is we have the highest percentage of women in Jeddah, founders of startup companies, all right? And it's I think 45% of the founders of the companies, of the startups that we end up funding are women in Saudi. And it may be the highest percentage of any startup accelerator in the world that's gender neutral. It's not aimed specifically at women. So I'll tell you from firsthand personal experience as an investor, the Saudi women are disproportionately beating the guys than most of the other ecosystems. So we have a question here. Microphone number 4 right there. There's the question. That's the guy I called on.
Hi, thank you for your amazing explanations. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I'm a social entrepreneur from the Dominican Republic. And it's amazing to see how a country like Saudi Arabia is pushing forward now. We are from a way earlier stage, and social entrepreneurs is even earlier. But what I would like for you, Jonathan, and John, and Joe, and even Ahmed, to say to the people that are here that are also investors, what they should be looking for in the startups that are investing in here in Saudi Arabia, because we keep saying, yeah, we should receive more investment, but maybe hearing from you guys, what is it that they should be looking for, and how to crack the glass ceiling on investment here, going to startups. That will be super interesting for us to hear what they should.
Okay. Sure.
So let me tweak the question a bit, just to fit it in the macro theme. And should we, as an ecosystem development mandate, educate investors or educate entrepreneurs? And how should we balance those efforts in building a self-sustaining ecosystem?
Sure. And again, I'll have to say I'm still more just learning about the regions, and I'm excited to learn more. One thing some of my hosts have talked to me about is the availability of funding for smaller businesses. Here maybe could be a little bit stronger. So there's a lot of programs with the banks, and the banks are very eager to give money to the large corporations. It seems like there's not as many programs to access small business. And I think when we're talking about entrepreneurship and developing an economy, there's different types of entrepreneurship. In Silicon Valley, there's some, you might call us very unbalanced people that are only focused on building as big a possible company or else blowing up. And that's one way of doing things. It's very extreme. I think more important for the economy of the region, and my new view that I'm learning, is to have many small businesses developed and many people as entrepreneurs, creating worthwhile businesses. And I think the funding at the smaller level is something that's very important to create access to here. So I think just developing that ecosystem is key. In terms of the investors looking to invest in things more related to Silicon Valley, I guess I'll say two things. One is, how much does the engineering team own of the company, and is it a really engineering company? Because I think the biggest challenge in these companies is they fail because they're not able to deliver technically. And so I think making sure it's really an engineering company and not someone who just hired engineers but gave them no partnership. I think that's important. And then two, I think the theme that I would say is probably strongest in this region right now is taking things that seem like they might have worked in the consumer space in other parts of the world, but that have not been able to work here yet because they don't have the right connections with government, they don't have the right logistics, they don't have the right setup. I think there's a lot of promise to build a lot of these powerful consumer companies that exist elsewhere but not here. And so for me, that's something that's very interesting as an investment theme right now.
So I'll offer a comment and pick up on your twist to the question. I mean, first of all, it should be quite clear that we now have a more level playing field in terms of there are going to be opportunities that make sense in the Dominican Republic that wouldn't work in the United States. So I think people should feel confident about their communities because they're going to have a different set of problems to solve, at least that, for example, you might have a better idea how to solve. Secondly, I would say I think we have to be careful. One of the common refrains we get when we ask entrepreneurs, how can we help, is, oh, we need more access to capital. And I'm afraid, one of the benefits of working for a foundation where you have no customers and no constituents, but you've got $3 billion in the basement, as ours does, we're in a situation we have to tell the truth. Okay, so one of the things of the truth is I think there's enough capital, frankly, and I do think if I was to answer that and/or question, which is a little difficult, but I would say you probably have to be educating the entrepreneur more than you have to be educating the investor. I mean, we've moved into an environment where we've seen the growth not just of obviously crowdfunding, which is much better known, but of the individual angel investor. We've got thousands and thousands more people around the world. I am on the board of something called the Global Business Angels Network, and it basically is an entity that manages the business angel networks around the world, and it's amazing. There isn't a week that doesn't go by when we don't have a new member from some bizarre part of the world of individual angel investors who come together, form clubs and networks. So I think there's plenty of capital. I think the real challenge is that I think we've got to do a better job at getting more precise about really understanding what it makes to have an idea that's going to fly. So I think that's one word of caution in that I think we have to dispel myths about, is it really about an absence of capital?
So the clock's not on, so I don't know how much time we have, but let's take question. We'll take 3 in a row, and then the panelists still comment. And if the guys over on the side can turn the clock back on so we see how much time we have left.
Good afternoon. My name is Dima Ikhwan, and my question is again about that funding and access to capital. I think there is a lot of capital in the region that's looking for a good investment, but my question is that there doesn't seem to be a good connection between the entrepreneurs and the capital providers. So what would you suggest in terms of creating an ecosystem? And I'm sure like the venture capitalists are smiling now, but what would you suggest in terms of creating an ecosystem where we can funnel that capital into entrepreneurs' hands?
Okay. Should I answer now?
No, do you mind? Let's just take 3 questions so we can do 2 rounds of 3 questions. Question. Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Sabih, and my question is probably built on the lady question about the VC model that you think it's better fit for the region. Is there any different? I mean, VC models differ between countries and region. Europe different than the US, and the role that they play, maybe Europe different than play in India, different than the role that they play in the US, different because of the different maturity of the founders and the ecosystem. So in the MENA region, Saudi Arabia or the Gulf, what's the most important elements of their role that it should play in the region? Thank you.
Okay. Last question here, 3rd question, then we'll answer all 3.
I had a similar question around Vinay Chawla from a Barrage Group about capital, but from a different perspective. Could one make the argument that for MENA you need a flavor of capital that is sort of Western bound, that it comes with as you said there, Jonathan, there is a lot of capital in the region, but that maybe you need something that comes from a Western world for validation. I mean, the region is identified today as an LP, as a place for investors because of some major investments that investors from this part of the world have made. Do you think it would make a difference, even though capital is just capital, if capital was coming from Silicon Valley or Europe or other places and there were some landmark transactions? Thank you.
Validation investment. No? So we'll comment. The 3 questions are tied together. Why don't we take comments on all 3?
I actually met some of your colleagues in Dubai from Barrage, and you guys are doing some very good tech investing, in the region, even though it's a smaller thing that what you guys do. I guess I'd answer to talk briefly about how I see the investing work in Silicon Valley, and there might be some ideas from there that could be helpful. Someone I really admired earlier was Canada's finance minister, Jim Flaherty, who passed away, but he was trying to put more Canadian money into entrepreneurship to have a VC ecosystem there too. And what we were able to convince him to do is, rather than give all the VC money to the banks, because all the investment bankers wanted to be the guys who can control it, we said, make sure you allocate a large percentage of it to entrepreneurs who've already been successful, who are now willing to go back and to help other entrepreneurs. Because in Silicon Valley, if you look at how a lot of it works, it's people who have built companies helping the next generation build more companies. And so for example, an early stage investment of $2 or $3 million in Silicon Valley, the very common model now amongst my friends is that the person's very talented. You say, I'm going to give you 1/10 of this investment, $300,000, but here's my other friends who build companies. Go talk to them, convince them, and you quickly, within a week, bring together an angel investment round. And now when the person's building and they have a question, they have many people on their cap table. They call and they say, when you did this, what's the answer? Or do you know someone who can help me with this? And so obviously that's a very important ecosystem. And I think right now, because you don't have as many founders yet, it may be useful to have outside Western founders, but it's also very important, if you do allocate money to the ecosystem, to try to get the people who are building to come back and help the next generation.
Okay, so a few comments. First of all, how can the ecosystem make it easier for me to get money? Just so you know, it's not designed to be, it shouldn't be easy. It should actually be hard. But the good news is, what I was trying to explain in terms of the power of networks, is that almost everything is 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation. And it doesn't matter, because you're putting a level of investment into building communities and building relationships that are going to help you do what Joe's talking about, which is essentially, when the time comes, you'll need to collect a bunch of people who are going to be wanting to invest in this. And that's going to come because you're able to actually spend, because you've already got communities and networks that you can lean upon and ask them to get out there and help you find the right person. You may end up just with a mentor, but the chances are you'll get some capital. Very quickly on cross-border investing, absolutely. We're seeing the rapid scaling of the number of investors in the United States, for example, but also coming from Israel, from Berlin, from other cities around the world that have been known for having strong entrepreneurial ecosystems where they've got entrepreneurs that are willing to put their own money back into ventures. And it's not just things like 500 startups where you have geeks on a plane fly out to a city and have a trip. You know, it's becoming a lot more sophisticated. And I think it's actually good for the global entrepreneurial ecosystem that you're seeing a diversity of investors because of the future work that they end up doing as a result of co-investing in a company in a new market. The challenge is that investors still are cautious about investing in a country or a legal environment that they don't really understand. And so they've tended to invest through funds. If they want to invest in Africa, you know, I'm lucky, I know a lot of people in Nairobi. So when I invested in a company recently, I was fortunate enough to know that Steve Case was going to invest in it. And so we had a level of like, understanding as to what's going on. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is absolutely the wave of the future, that you'll see a global investment consortium in going into startups.
And I would actually offer a slightly counter opinion on ecosystem development, which is the approach we've taken, which is that in an undeveloped ecosystem, you have to do the full stack. Okay, and so our group has done, we have the real estate for the tech park, which is the Greek campus in downtown Cairo. We have the accelerator network throughout the Middle East of having the startup accelerator and the VC fund on top of that. So by filling in the blanks in the ecosystem, because it's not yet an ecosystem, the definition of ecosystem in my book is self-sustainability. And we're missing that in the startup in every one of the countries in the region. And that's what we're trying to do, is to fill in as many of the gaps as we can ourselves, while other people fill in different gaps.
Can I just have one comment?
Yes.
One thing I should mention, because I see he's sitting here in the room, but he's got a session tomorrow. You should read Chris Schroeder's book about the Middle East in terms of really understanding about this in the Middle East. Hey, Chris.
Question here, question there. That's your question. And I think, do you have a microphone? No, 2 questions and then we'll be done. Right there.
ميسون أبو بكر كاتبة في
Keep the question short.
Yes, الجزيرة. حضرتك قلت في بداية هذه الجلسة أشرت إلى نساء رائدات في المملكة العربية السعودية في الاستثمار، وكان منهم ريادة في الشرق الأوسط، سواء في الكافيار على سبيل المثال في المنطقة الشرقية أو نساء أخريات. أيضا زيارة سيدي ولي العهد محمد بن سلمان لعدد من الدول وعمل عدد من الشراكات الاقتصادية. أيضا الشراكة أو الاستثمار في شركة أوبر العالمية. أود أن أسأل المحاضرين كيف قدم الإعلام الخارجي الاستثمار واقتصاد المملكة العربية السعودية في وقت وجدنا فيه ضبابية من بعض الإعلام الآخر. شكرا لعدالة رئيس الجلسة.
Here.
Somebody someday is going to invent a microphone that automatically turns on.
Just yell, I can hear you.
Wow, even the mic does not want me to speak sometimes. No, thank you very much. Rabin Pasha, I just came from Erbil, Iraq, where we were lucky enough to launch Global Entrepreneurship Week with the Vice President of Global Entrepreneurship Network.
Okay.
Many people don't think of Iraq or
Rabin,
Erbil.
I'm not going to try to be rude, but I have a minute, 30 seconds, so make just a question, no statement.
I know, and this has been our problem. We found a lot of innovators, we have a lot of entrepreneurship, we're building an incubator, and it's been really hard to get support from the Gulf, from the Arab community, from the Middle East. And I'd like to implore you to, how do we get the challenges of building an ecosystem from scratch when we are finding great entrepreneurs, to find investors to take them to the next level, because we need to rebuild that region. I'd appreciate your insight into this.
I would give you that.
Thank you very much.
I am working across the Middle East, okay? You have to convince me and others, even if you have to lie to us, of stability. We have a negative perception, and investors are chicken. They're terrified. They hate instability, right? Especially in startups, when we're making the most long-term, most illiquid investment ever. I can't even sell my startups for 10 years, unlike a piece of real estate. It's the most illiquid investment in the world. So we're really, really looking for stability. That's the only thing. I would love to come, but it just, I can't see 10 years out.
Do you have the first question?
First question, what was that?
First question is the perception of the Saudi initiative, the Saudi investment in Uber, and how it's perceived in the West.
Do you want want to take that one?
Oh, sure. I guess the first question, I didn't understand the full thing, but about the perception of the Saudi investments in Uber and how it's perceived in the West. And I think there's a lot of interest in the West and engaging with the Middle East as LPs and as investors. And I think one of the things that we're really excited about is how we could maybe test new things here, because in the US we still have a regulatory apparatus where many things take 3, 4, 5 years. So for example, with the Hyperloop that we're bringing here, you actually can build it very quickly if you know the leaders and they're excited about it, and that's very exciting. So I think there's many ways in which we can engage and use the Middle East as a place to innovate.
So our time is up, but we'll do just 30 seconds. If you want to make a closing statement, 30 seconds, and we'll call it from there. Sorry, my time is at 00. Tina, Alan, can we go a couple of minutes over? The gentleman, you've been standing for a while. Go ahead. Question.
Yeah.
The only question I have, what are the courses available in your information for the Saudi students? What course they can do, and what efforts can you provide to the Saudi students to study further and to employ them in the organization of ecosystem? What opportunities and career opportunities available for them? What courses, and which is the best university to study for the courses? And what is the best talent get recognized?
So, go.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate the question. That's great interest. I think there's many things we've put online in the last 10 years from the U.S. that are free, and I think the best ones tend to be tied to the top schools, such as, I'm biased, I went to Stanford. MIT also has good courses online, Berkeley and Caltech. But I think the MIT and Stanford courses online, if you learn basic computer science theory, you practice building things on the web, I think those skills are in great need. And there's many ways within a year you could be a very valuable employee to a startup company if you dive in and learn that. So I think the technical skills for me would be what I would build out with those online courses.
I would second, third, quadruple that. Study coding, study technical skills. We funded a guy in Egypt who graduated from the equivalent of a trade school, self-taught to above PhD level in artificial intelligence. And after we funded him, Samsung and Vodafone put $1 million in him a couple of years later. He was that good, all self-educated, all online. Sorry, you don't get a follow-up.
Yep. Yeah, I just quickly say, a lot of education is self-education. It's getting involved in communities. I mean, one of the benefits of things like startup weekends or other kinds of community startup activities is that people start to get an understanding of the field enough to be able to then make a course at MIT or Stanford useful. We've also got them at the Kauffman Foundation, Kauffman.org. We have a founders school. All this content is free. And I just would add one last thing. There is lots of great content here in Saudi Arabia, in Arabic, in some of the other Middle East regions. And certainly I'd be happy if you want to see me afterwards, I can give you the references to it. We're going to be opening our operations here in Saudi Arabia next year, Gen Saudi Arabia, and we'll be actually making that a point of making all those resources free and available to people.
And closing, if you're not optimistic about the future of startups in Saudi, you should be, and in the Arab world, and in their ability to create jobs and to solve social problems. I want to thank my two co-panelists. Thank you all for being a great audience. Thank you for your participation. I want to thank them for their wonderful comments. And we're available for any questions or discussion afterwards. Thank you all, and thank you to the organizers.
Thank you.